Hello, hello, hello. Stephanie here, and welcome aboard episode 66 of the Rent to Rent Success podcast. And today we are talking about commercial property. Whether you're new to property or experienced, you'll love today's insights into how commercial property can help you to grow your wealth and your business. Now, I love rent to rent as a business model, and the idea of guaranteed rent in residential property and commercial leases in residential property actually came over from commercial property. So today I'm delighted to welcome Jerry Alexander. Now, Jerry started off with simple residential buy-to-let strategy, which has now morphed into a large portfolio of multi-let buildings. Jerry's niche is CMO, which is the equivalent of HMO, but for commercial property. And Jerry hosts the hugely popular Commercial Property Investors podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Jerry. It's great to have you with us.
It's super to be here. Thanks, Stephanie. And that was so succinct. I think we're done.
Oh, you're not getting away that easy. We want to know the full 911. So tell us a little bit about you, Jerry. How did you get started in property initially?
Okay, so I've always had interest in buildings, and I did actually end up doing a building sort of qualification, but it was in building engineering. Goodness me, I can't remember any of that. But I had an interest in buildings, and then I read Kiyosaki, the usual book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I read Richest Man in Babylon, and both of those taught me I needed to get going and what to do, or at least to get started. So I started buying simple buy-to-lets, which I would refurb, do up, rent out, and then refinance. So I was just going through the usual thing. And of course, at the time, I thought, well, I have to save up deposits, don't I, right? So that's what you do. You save up the deposit. I did get some private finance, although at the time, I didn't think of it as such, which helped kickstart it. But then ultimately, I moved from resi into commercial. So yeah, it's been interesting. I couldn't sit here and say that it was a strategy I wanted to do, and that's exactly where I had my focus. But in the end, through a few different reasons, I ended up doing commercial property, and I haven't looked back. In fact, we don't have any residential anymore now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm just intrigued because it wasn't a set plan that you had. How did you get into it in the first place? So there you were buying your singlets. How did you go from there? How did you?
So have you ever played Cash Flow from Robert Kiyosaki, Stephanie? Have you ever played the board game?
I haven't played the board game.
Okay, no worries. So in the game, you pick up assets, all right? And the idea is to try and get out of the rat race. And there's two types of deals in this game. One of them is small deals, which might include stocks and shares or buying buy-to-lets. And then there's big deals, which are you need a minimum amount of money to buy them, and they're a bit more interesting. And I was going around in life thinking, how do I find a real big deal? How do I find a big deal? Where are they? How do I get something that's got more scale? So these days, people might look at HMO, or they might look at a multi-let, even if they are separate units, but a multi-let building for residential. But at the time, I didn't really know what form it was going to take. But what I did do is I went to the agent locally, the resi guy that I was dealing with, the surveyor, and said, I'm thinking about trying to do something bigger. What should we do? And he said, well, maybe you should talk to my colleague here in commercial. So when I started talking to him, which I have to say took a bit of time because, as usual, as an agent, he was ignoring my phone calls and the secretary wasn't returning my phone calls and all that sort of stuff. But eventually I got to see him. And he said to me, oh, Jerry, yes, there is some good deals around. The thing is, in the local market, there's about 3 or 4 guys that buy that stuff. They see it first. And if they haven't bought it, it'll come on the market. But of course, by default, it's probably not a good deal. So if I were you, I would stick to that residential thing. So that wasn't a great introduction, but I carried on looking, and I ended up finding it through networking at the local gym. Somebody who was thinking about doing resi, and a relative had a commercial building they might be selling. And cut a long story short, about 12 months later, we finally bought a multi-let commercial building. But I did not go out there looking for such a thing. I didn't even know such a thing existed, of course. But that's how we got into it. It was just that hunger for trying to find a bit more scale.
Yeah. And tell us about the first one. Can you remember what the investment was?
Yes, so we still have it. So that was 2004 we bought that building. So we still have it. At the time, it cost £240,000 plus £8,000 in stamp duty and the VAT. At the time, you could have probably bought a 3-4 bedroom house where we are for the same price. So what I did was I sold 2 houses or a flat and a house or something. Anyway, I sold some resi, so I had some money to go and buy this building. And at the time, it was about 20, let me get this right, about 24 separate units within the building, not big units, 1-person offices up to maybe 10-person offices, and a little bit of workspace or workshop space. But it wasn't particularly run brilliantly. It was 100% let, which is good. Did mean that we paid a fair price for it. But over the next 3 or 4 years, whilst I'm running another business, we did it up. Somebody moved out, we did up their unit, we maybe put in a suspended ceiling, whatever, we put in staff, a member of staff to look after the building. And then we ended up with 35 units by splitting bits and pieces up. And we actually tripled the income, which was brilliant. Now, the income was 24 grand initially, which is why the valuation came out at 240. We managed to get up to about 75. And then I thought, well, I'm going to go buy another one. And I found one. And the bank said, well, we'll need to get a revaluation on this other one. And I had no idea what happened to the value of it. And said, all right, fine. So we got the valuer out. The valuer came out, I had a look around. And he phones me up and he says, Jerry, so what do you think? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to say anything. That's why you're here. Yeah. So he said, well, I think it's probably worth about 700, 750. Exactly. And I was like, really? And of course, all I'd been doing is working on building up cash flow because that's what I was investing for. But what I hadn't realized was that commercial is so orientated, the value of commercial is so orientated around the income.
Yeah.
So I'd increased the rent, tripled it, and it tripled the value of the building.
Yeah. So
that was a big light bulb moment because originally when I was doing resi, what I thought you did with commercial was you parked money in it. Mm-hmm. So with resi, you buy it, you try and do it up, you try and add value or buy it below market value. And then to be fair, you kind of sit and wait for the market to go up.
Yeah.
And in commercial, I thought you bought an asset at a 10% yield and that was it. Mm-hmm. You know, and you get a lease, of course, and you sit and just enjoy the 10%, which isn't a great return overall. But what I realized after getting that revaluation was commercial can be a really active sport, and you can really add value by affecting things to do with stuff that's in your control. You're not sitting and waiting for the market to change. You change what the offer is and you can increase the value. So that was really, really interesting. So that's why we doubled down and got much more busy in commercial.
That is a phenomenal story. I just love it. We've had some small experience within commercial as well. And I love that very fact that you're just talking about there, that you uplift the value just by uplifting the rent. And it's so easy to do that. And you're not at the mercy of markets or anything else. You can actively pursue it. So tell us, you've got this one unit now gone from 24 units up to 34, and where did you go next?
So this was in 2009. So there's some similarities with where we are right now. Okay, I know planning things are changing and there's a Class E and all that stuff, but in terms of the economy, in 2009, obviously the proverbial hit the fan and things started changing. And what happened was the value of some commercial properties, or at least the sales price of commercial properties, started coming down. But the other thing that changed was that there was lots more companies looking to come out of leases where they're effectively on a 5 or a 10-year lease and thinking, I don't really want to sign up for another 5 years because I don't know what the economy is going to do. And you think about that, there's lots right now, yeah? So over the next 2 or 3 years, I fully expect quite a lot of leased companies with leases looking for more flexible options, because that's what happened last time. So you had this double whammy where property got a bit more attainable because the value came, or the cost came down, and the demand started going up because people started coming out of lease. Anyway, so in 2009, we managed to find another building at a good price. This one had now has 100. now has 55 units in it and some storage around it as well. So we put containers around it as well. And it was about twice the size of the first one, but it was really poorly run, very under-occupied. And over the next 2 or 3 years, we redeveloped it and just satisfied these inquiries that were coming in because of what was happening in the economy. Mm-hmm. And then we were fortunate enough to buy the one across the road about 3-4 years later. And then we bought another one, which was our first historical building. I really like, that's what I kind of wanted to do all this for, was doing up old building. I love old buildings, all the character and everything. And we bought this one that had a jail in it, a courthouse, a courtroom, a 3-story jail, a mortuary, and like, the jail yard with like this 12-foot wall, but also like a registry office. It was kind of like the local court building.
Yeah.
So quite a quirky space. But because we'd had successes with the other buildings, we managed to get the bank to fully fund that one and redevelop. It was the first one we bought that with no income at all. Yeah. And we managed to redevelop that. And then we've gone on and done a few more subsequently. But the historical stuff is the bit that I really enjoy. So that's where I'm trying to, at the end of the day, if an asset's going to make money, great. But I really do enjoy the older ones. So I'm still always looking out for those older listed buildings to repurpose.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out, you're on Instagram, Jerry, so people can follow you there and keep up with some of the buildings and so on. So have I got that right, Jerry Alexander 101?
On Instagram, it's jerryalexander.commercial. Sorry, it's right there in front of my face, and I didn't even pay attention to the exact. jerryalexander.commercial.
.commercial. So if you want to keep up with
Jerry Alexander 101, I think is Facebook.
Right. Okay. So there we go. jerryalexander.commercial. Yes, it's interesting. Tell us a little bit about the financing, because you mentioned there that this was the first one that you had fully financed. Is that for the purchase and for the development?
That was for the purchase. I got private money in for the development.
Yeah.
So we've been really lucky. From a financial institution point of view, all our funding has come from high street banks.
Yeah.
In terms of like some longer term debt, we've got some private financing, and recently we bought a commercial building, actually our biggest one to date, all with private money, which is great. So there's no bank debt on that one at all.
Yeah.
And there's no developer finance either. It's just purely private loans that's in that one. But the historical one was bank funded 100% of the purchase. And to be fair, they gave a bit towards the finance of the deal. The heating, we put in a biomass boiler, that was asset financed. And then the redevelopment itself was through private finance. So it was a mix, but we basically didn't really put anything into that deal, which was really quite interesting.
Yeah, I love that. People can see from just listening, especially on that first deal where you were just not realizing how amazing it would be, how useful commercial can be. What's the first thing that you would say that someone should do if they were thinking about getting started in commercial property?
So the thing about commercial property that I think people find frustrating and look at it and then get distracted back to resi is the fact that the market's pretty opaque. It's not very transparent. So on resi, you can go on Rightmove and find houses and flats, whatever, pretty much everywhere. You can see stats on what's sold and what hasn't and all that sort of stuff. And commercial's a bit more tricky. Agents tend not to return your phone calls. They certainly don't return my phone calls. Maybe it's just me. And it can be quite difficult to work out what's going on. So the first thing I would say is people really need to try and just get in the swim and understand what the different strategies are in this market. As you mentioned at the start, my strategy is multi-let, but there are lots of other strategies within this marketplace. And I think one of the most important things is just to give yourself some more context about how this market works. Listen to podcasts, read some books, go on Clubhouse, get involved in some of those conversations, and don't necessarily take what the press says about commercial or what the headlines say about commercial as verbatim, because what happens in your target market is really 99% of the effect there is local supply and demand, whereas national macroeconomics has an impact, but nowhere near as much as local stuff. So I wouldn't get put off by what everybody says in the news and everything, but I would absorb it all, so you can get a better understanding of how this marketplace works. And then when you do get started, start small.
Great advice, Jerry. And I just want to give a shout out. You have got your Commercial Property Investors podcast. So
yes,
people
thank you.
can binge listen that, as I have, and get lots of different angles on commercial property investing. And I think many of our listeners who are interested in HMO in residential property investing, that's houses of multiple occupation or house shares, will also be interested in CMO, what you do, where you've got your commercial multiple occupation as well. So you've given us some ideas of what people can do when they're first getting started off. And now I want to ask the other side is, what's the biggest mistake you see people making in commercial, maybe who don't have as much experience?
I think the thing that holds people back the most in commercial, or let me rephrase that. The thing that's held me back the most in commercial is the person sitting in my seat. And I know that's the same in lots of things, right? But it's so true, because there could be somebody else sitting in the house down the road from me here who's doing commercial property, and their expectations completely different, and that's only what's going on in their head, and it makes all the difference in the world. You know, it's about expectation and sitting yourself around people who are going to add rather than subtract. So conditioning is really, really important, and being self-aware. So, you know, if you're getting into residential property and you think one property a year for 10 years is a good strategy, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you think that's what's possible, then that's probably what you'll end up doing. But what you don't know is that there's a meeting going on next door with 5 investors who are all thinking about adding 10 a year in the next 5 years, and they've got 50 and you've got 5, and the only difference was the expectation and the conditioning that you're. So it's really important to be aware of where your thinking's at and how you can circumnavigate, how you can get yourself out of the way. So that would be one of the big tips, I would say.
Yeah, and it's an answer people rarely like, but I'm very interested in it, Jerry. And obviously you have changed your mindset a lot from when you very first started, and you told us about the single lets you were going for, and you were unaware of all these other things. What would you say is the thing that's pushed the needle the biggest to allow you to take on these much bigger deals and look at the private finance and all the other things? Are there one or a few things that you think have done that for you?
So the thing that's probably done the most for me there, which is not a great answer for your listeners, is time.
Yeah.
Because I've been doing this for a while, and private finance wasn't something funnily enough, as I said, I did use it on the first one, but I never really thought about it as a strategy, and I would have done it more. Knowing how the market works and how to assess how the market is in those local areas or where the supply and demand is really important. And it's taken me ages to work out how to do that. And it's taken me ages to work out, I guess, how to take these big problem buildings and change them into better sustainable projects. And if I'd had a guiding hand, I would have done it a lot faster. My guiding hand has been time. So, you know, I've been doing it for a long time. It's allowed me to get to a reasonable level of success. But I think if I'd had more support, or if I'd seeked out more support, then I would be much further on. So my biggest asset's been time, but that's not what all of us have. And I'd rather have done it a lot quicker.
Yeah, and people can do it more quickly by, as you say, working with an expert, you know, maybe like yourself, listening to the podcast and taking additional steps to get that support. Do you work with people and support them in getting started in commercial, Jerry?
Yeah, so I mean, over the years, I've helped lots of people that have asked bits and pieces, but I've never had anything structured. And time is short, yeah. So I decided about a year ago to start doing a more official kind of process. So now I do run masterminds over like a 9-month, 12-month period, where because commercial, you can't learn it all in 2 weeks and then go and hit the road running, right? You have to go, you have to learn something, get in the swim, go and learn, kick some tires, talk to some agents, look at properties, do some assessments, come back, learn a bit more, go back out in the field. So it takes a bit of time. And the fastest I've ever done a deal is 9 months.
Wow.
Now, maybe I'm slow, but if you want to negotiate on price, one of the key negotiators is time.
Yeah.
So it does take time to go through these things and to know what to say and what to look for. So my personal approach is to help people over maybe a 9-month period to really work their way through the whole understanding, working out how the market works, how to look for these assets, how to finance them, and then, of course, potentially how to run them. Because there's 3 elements to this business, and it's the same in resi. It's exactly the same in resi. There's 3 elements. There's one, which is investing in property, buying the asset and looking for a secure income. The second thing is developing the asset. So you might buy a house and redevelop it. Now, you might have a developer or a main contractor that will do that. And it's the same in commercial. And then the third element is actually the managing of it. So in residential, that might be a residential agent. In commercial, it might be a commercial agent, or if you do a more flexible offering that we do, we actually have our own agent effectively, which is our operations company. So you could do just investment, just development, or just operations, and incidentally, rent to rent. I mean, our sector has a lot of rent to rent businesses in it, where people will rent a commercial space. Somebody like Regis or WeWork, they don't tend to own their properties. They rent them and then sublet them. It's very prevalent. It's been going, 20, 30 years that's been going on in this industry. And it is a successful strategy. But you can choose to do one of those 3 or all of them. And in our market, or for us, we do all 3. We try and find the assets, buy them, develop them ourselves, and maintain them, because the margin across that is much higher. So it's quite interesting. There's lots of different ways into it.
Yeah, and you can support people when they're getting started. Now, the 2 things that I want to come to before we close is, I know that people will be very interested. You say you've attracted private finance, quite significant amounts, and I just wonder if you have any tips that you would like to pass on about that. Now, you have said one, which is time and experience. Is there anything else that you think is important?
So experience doesn't have to be always yours. It could be your team, the people that are around you, your squad, depending on what it is you're doing. Another one, I guess, is it's partly to do with vision and being able to verbalize that vision of what you think can be done. But I think a lot of the time, this stuff is not reinventing the wheel. You just maybe need to go and find some other similar projects that have been done. They might not have been yours. They might be somebody else's, that you can use to show those investors what's possible, rather than just talking the talk and saying, I think this will happen. You've actually got to go and find that information. Now, for me, it was doing one project, smaller project, pushing the envelope a little bit. Next project, pushing the envelope a bit further. Next project, push. So when we bought the last building we bought had 15,000 square feet of vacant space, which on the business rates meant that just having that space empty was costing 40 grand a year. So, it's not a great investment, right? At least not on the face of it. It's minus 40 grand. But over time, if you work out how to get around these things and you can start to prove that and you've developed your skill set, people start trusting you more and more and more. So it's a little bit about the starting small and realizing that if I want to get more private finance, maybe I just have to take a step back and do a smaller project first. Then I'm going to work up to the big ones, even though the big ones look really great.
Yeah.
And some people want to just dive in all guns blazing. But sometimes you've got to earn your teeth, or whatever it's called, yeah? And you just start small and bring them with you. And you can then move on to those bigger and bigger projects.
I think some great advice there. And the other brilliant piece of advice you gave was that the experience doesn't need to be your own. Because say, for example, if somebody partnered with you and offered you something that made it a great deal for you, and you're just giving your expertise, and they're doing the donkey work, then that could be a great arrangement for both parties.
Yes, of course. Yep, absolutely. The other one, Stephanie, if you're looking at just commercial from a leasing point of view, one of the best strategies, if you can do it, is finding a tenant first, then go and find the building. Because that way, when you go to raise the finance, you've got a bit of security around it. Okay, you're going to be spinning a few plates, agreements, and making sure everybody signs on the same day and all that sort of stuff. But it is another way of getting in, finding a demand. And a lot of the time, you'll actually, just through conversations, demand does present itself to yourself, but if you're not tuned into it, you don't really know. You've not really noticed. But there might be some of the contractors you work with need space, or they need yard space, or they need to grow their business. And actually, you're just like, it just passes you by. You don't think about it. But if you're listening out, sometimes you're like, oh, I've got 3 contractors. They're all growing. They all want to be in a space. I've just got to go and find the building now.
Yes. Yeah, great advice again. And our small foray into commercial is that we've got a large residential property with 12 units that's got one small shop on the front, and then we've got another property that is 2 offices and some resi, that a landlord who we manage some of his properties for on the rent-to-rent HMO side has asked us to take them over. So we're sort of taking a mini step into it. But what we found is that although to believe the news, you would say there's no demand for commercial, as you were saying. Actually, I've been surprised the number of phone calls I've had. The little shop is being refurbished, so it's not available right now. But we put our sign up in the window. And that's the only advertising, if you can call it that we've done. We've had several phone calls about it, and they're all from, small one-man bands type of companies, because, it's a small space, so it just seems ideal for them. And some people can't wait to get out of the house now. They want their own space.
Yeah. The market is changing, but there's definitely opportunity. I mean, there are some parts of the market that are struggling, but I mean, as an example, industrial and storage, all our space is 100% let. That market's really strong right now. And there will be a cross into retail, where retail starts to, because at the end of the day, it's space, isn't it, right? It's all about space. We all deal with space, and it's about the ability to flex that space to suit new trends and new needs. And there will be new trends and new needs for retail. I do think some of the retail will morph a little bit into supporting some what would have normally been industrial use. Just from whether it's the last, people talk about couriers and deliveries and that last step, and whether that's just on a local level in a shop. But you need good access and things. But I think there's loads of ways to reimagine these units. And there's that strength that you're talking about there, which is people have gone local. They really like to support local business now, and people just want to start up their local businesses. So I should imagine some of the phone calls you're getting are from, they're certainly not national brands. They're just people that want to start or get their own business into a professional environment.
Yeah, and I was hearing that during the first lockdown, that some of the so-called safe commercial tenants, the big brands, were refusing to pay their rent. Whereas some of the smaller brands, smaller businesses and one-man band type businesses do pay their rents. So it's just been a new situation, I suppose, across the board. But can I ask you, before we close today, what are the opportunities that you are seeking out for yourself this year as we're moving into uncharted territory?
Okay, so we've got 2 buildings that still have to be optimized. One of them we're building it out for a venue space. So this is an old flour mill, and we've developed, it's about 6 stories. We've developed the other stories all into private space and shared space and things. Incidentally, we did do modeling for residential in that building, but commercial worked better from a cash flow point of view. Anyway, we've got to develop out the ground floor. It's going to take a bit of time, but also our other development, the one we bought with the 15,000 square foot, that building there, our model's evolving. So that will have some venue space, some recording studios for things like what we're doing here, a business lounge, flexible desk space just for people just to come and use desks, but then private rooms, some light industrial. So it's a right mix, but it's trying to create a community of different businesses that can work sometimes together, sometimes they're apart, but not necessarily all in a kind of a hippie fashion of, we're all going to work together, but just they're all in the same building and you can do business with each other. But I guess it's that sense of community and that sense of being in a space where there's energy. So it's not just you, there's other activities going on, other people making things happen. And that really helps other businesses grow. So that's the environment we're trying to create more. But in terms of investment, we're going to continue looking for similar buildings. I'm going to try and get another industrial building that I can split. We have one that we've split down before and make more of a serviced offering in that, because I think that's definitely a growing opportunity. And I want to try and find more historical buildings because I just love doing them.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Jerry. I mean, it's been great to just get some small insights into the world of commercial property from you today. And we've seen that it can be a phenomenal strategy as well for building your wealth and growing the value of the assets that you own. So I thank you for coming and sharing that with us. As my final question, what would you say is the best thing about now being in property and having property as your full-time gig?
Choices.
Yeah.
Choices is the best thing. The other one is I feel like, especially with the older buildings, I can leave some kind of mark. So sustainability is kind of a good thing, and some of these buildings you just have to think, well, I'm kind of a custodian, if that's the right phrase. I'm just looking after this. I need to redevelop it. I make sure that this thing's sustainable into the future. That bit I really like.
Yeah, I love that. And tell us where can people find you, Jerry?
So I'm in the usual places and on Clubhouse, which we've both spent a bit of time on. My user handle's just my name, Jerry Alexander. On LinkedIn, it's Jerry Alexander. And I guess the best place really is just go and seek out the Commercial Property Investor podcast, and there'll be show notes there where you can find other things. But that's where I share a lot of the strategies and things that we've done and where we're at and how things are going. And today I did an interview with somebody who's doing industrial space, which is developing rather than just taking old stuff, which is not something I've done. It's just really fascinating. I mean, you'll know yourself doing these podcasts, you learn so much, don't you? Meet great people, and it's just really interesting to do. So the podcast is a great place to go.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal podcast. I really encourage you to go and check it out if you're even the slightest bit interested in looking into commercial. So I want to now thank you, Jerry, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to talk with you about a topic we don't normally cover on this show. And also thank you for watching and for listening. And until next week, have a great rest of the week. And remember, believe bigger, be bolder, be a game changer. See you next week. Bye for now.
Thanks.